Too. You got it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Monday, July 9th, 2018, and this is our Week 77 POTUS report with the most dangerous mind in America, the FETZ. Welcome, Jim. How are you today?
Louisa, thanks. Lots going on out there, lots to report, including an attack on Q I know you're going to address because
Yeah.
it's rather disconcerting absent a rebuttal.
Okay, well, we're gonna do our best. And what I'm gonna do first is screen share something very interesting in the news that I think people are all going to be find interesting. Let's recall the president's executive order back in December of 2017, where he wrote this executive order to had to move that over to seize. Okay, here, order blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights abuse or corruption. This included seizing accounts, financial accounts, and other things. Let's remember. So, and a lot of people are saying, well, is anything really happening, So I wanted to just show this other image that there's been a recent sighting of Bill and Hillary Clinton on a Delta airplane just recently. This is flying all over the internet. And I'm going to show you the video of this, which is on the GoldFish Report news page. I think I went too far. Hold on a second. So I wanted to show you that one. I'm sorry to be scrolling so quickly, guys, but this is my page that you can see. So here it is. Let's try to enlarge this here. Can you see this, Jim?
Yes, can see it fine.
There's Hillary. There's Bill. Flying Delta. Okay, so there you have it. So, Jim, that's interesting. So it looks like, looks like somebody's running out of money here, huh?
We don't have their own private jet, Louisa. Outstanding, exceptional.
And it looked like they were flying.
We're stunned.
Yeah, and it looked like they were flying without, Secret Service, any security. Yeah, which is really very.
They were flying first class. I can assure you.
Yeah, it looked like it.
Not what I experience when I fly.
No, not at all. I'm in steerage. So let's talk about the president's schedule. Today is a big day. As you know, today is July 9th.
Very.
Right. Today is the day that the president is going to announce his Supreme Court nomination. Jim, do you have any speculation on this?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the woman because if he wants to overthrow Roe v. Wade, she has a Roman Catholic background. She has like 7 kids. She obviously is a firm believer in, leaving it up to God's will, whether you reproduce or not. And it would be most effective politically to have a woman casting the deciding vote if it were to be overturned. Now, frankly, I hope very much that does not come to pass. We have several Republican senators, including Susan Collins of Maine, who made it very, very clear that if they sense the candidate is not going to be respective of precedent, particularly in regard to women's reproductive rights, that she will not support. And the margin is so thin that the defection of just one Republican senator could make a difference. 2 would be absolutely decisive. So, we may be in for the Senate battle of the century.
Yeah, I think you're right. I have to say, I think that the only reason why we're even talking about, Roe versus Wade is because they made it a political issue, and anything you make a political issue out of, you can divide people with. So I do think that who are you referring to? I think there were some rumors Judge Jeanine Pirro was going to be one.
No. It's a woman. Three names. I can find it. There were 3 Kavanaugh,
right.
and
Right. Kavanaugh didn't make. Yeah. Okay.
And the third, she's very prominent. Dianne Feinstein had been concerned about her because she felt that the Catholic faith was so strong within her, which is a reason why I think that you can select her without even asking her about her attitude toward Roe v. Wade to know she's going to be unsympathetic.
Well, talk about disclosure. I think it would be, important to disclose how many legislators are Luciferian, and
But my opinion, yeah.
I mean, that's extremely important to know, because that is not something that would be in the American people in the freedom-loving country in their best interest. So if these politicians and leaders are Luciferian, if they are Satanists and they are practicing Satanism, I think we would want to know that and have a judgment on them as well in terms of representing our best interest, because, Jim, they forgot that they work for the people. They forgot this.
Well, I think it's more the other way around. They get into power and they don't care about the people. My opinion is that Roe v. Wade was one of the wisest decisions ever rendered by the Supreme Court, dividing into trimesters where unrestricted abortion in the first, a state can qualify how it's done in the second, and only after viability, namely the ability of the developing fetus to survive outside of the intrauterine environment, which occurs at the end of the second trimester, does this primitive first right to life occur, where absent conflicting rights with a mother with respect to her health or life, no abortion may be permitted. That would be murder. I think that's a wise decision, but the most important aspect of Roe, why I support it, is it provides every woman the opportunity to make a decision based upon her own personal circumstance, her family situation, discussion with her husband or physician, and so forth. In other words, it doesn't impose one set of beliefs upon any other person with regard to their actions. It respects everyone's right to believe whatever they do and take actions consistent with those beliefs with regard to their own person, without turning women who would prefer not to carry a fetus to term into reproductive slaves, because that's the equivalent here. If we were to ban abortion, you'd be forcing women to carry to term unwanted fetuses. We know children who are unwanted have a high propensity to become juvenile delinquents and subsequently professional criminals, to become incarcerated at great expense to the taxpayer. It's a lose-lose to force a woman to carry to term an unwanted child, not only for her personally, but for society generally. So I support the right to choose without any qualification.
Jim, thank you very much for that. Bravo. I'm absolutely bravo. I applaud you for that very well described and thought out and very provocative. And I'll be honest with you, I echo those words 100%. This is where my own personal, not that it really should matter to anybody, but quite honestly, it is my body, and nobody should have the right to tell me what to do with it.
It has been said.
Bottom
It has
line.
been said, Louisa, that if men could become pregnant, abortion would be our most sacred right.
Yeah, exactly. I do, and I completely and wholeheartedly agree with this late phase. And if you haven't decided by then that this is not going to be a pregnancy for you, I really think you need to make that decision in that first trimester, and get it over with, because I think it's cruel. It's cruel.
Well, some state has passed a new law restricting abortions after the 6th week, but many women don't even know they're pregnant, until after the 6th week. I mean, it's simply absurd. And the fact that you have a heart function or brain function is not determinative of viability. It occurs with lung development at the end of the second trimester, which is why that criterion has functioned so appropriately.
Well, make it 10 weeks then, but it has to be, but if you're engaging in activity, then it's your responsibility to know if you're pregnant. Okay, so you should be taking those tests immediately, and you can tell very early on today, very, very early on in a pregnancy. So the responsibility lies with the woman. If she's going to get pregnant, then she should, or if she's going to have intercourse, then she is at risk for pregnancy. Obviously, then you need to take the responsibility and know when you're pregnant and make a decision as to if you become.
Needless to say, you can have an unintended pregnancy regardless of taking precautions for multiple of reasons we don't need to review.
Exactly.
But 6 months, the second trimester is 4 times 6, 24 weeks. There's a 24-week interval there under Roe, during which a woman has the right to secure an abortion, which I think is completely appropriate. And I agree that thereafter only to save the life or the health of the mother, where many have disputed the plasticity of the notion of the health of the mother, but I'm willing to leave that up to the
Yeah.
appropriate medical authorities, a person or physician in her family.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it should only be 6 weeks. I mean, I'm certainly flexible with this. It's not, it's just my opinion, it's my view, because I do have two children and I do know, how sacred that is to me. Unfortunately and sadly, it's not sacred to every woman, but to most women it is. And, and it is a very difficult debate. I do think it should be illegal in the third trimester, period. I mean, I have some, in my own personal belief, I do, there's definitely some wiggle room in that second trimester, but, again, it's, certainly, certainly the responsibility of a woman who is having activity to
The
know
woman
whether
I'm
they're
talking
pregnant.
about is Amy Conley Barrett.
Oh,
Amy
right.
Conley Barrett, whom I expect to be the nominee, will find. There's a couple of others, of course, he's men, but I do think for the reasons I've already explained that
Right,
he's going
right.
to go with her.
Absolutely. Now, he did suggest that there was going to be a woman. It was going to be between two women, basically, he said last week. So, and again, Jim, thank you so much for so eloquently stating a very fair and reasonable perspective on this. Absolutely, Jim. And especially,
Yeah,
very,
it's a matter of profound importance. I've actually dealt with it in college courses. I've actually published about it in
yeah,
articles
yeah,
and in at least one book entitled Render Unto Darwin, The Christian Rights Crusade Against Science, which is a rather interesting volume all by itself for those who might want to pursue these issues
yeah,
further,
yeah,
where I lay out the principles by which we can determine the most viable theory of the nature of morality on the basis of objective criteria of adequacy, which turns out to be the deontological conception of always treating other persons with respect and never merely as a means, which explains why various actions like murder, kidnapping, robbery, rape are all immoral. I mean, we know they're wrong, but we may not know why they're wrong. It's because they're so disrespectful in using other persons merely as means.
yeah. Well, Jim, and especially as a man, I really do appreciate, that perspective that you gave, because not everybody shares that perspective. And quite honestly, it is a political issue and it has no business being a political issue, period. So, I think that you've given sound reason and logic to this issue. And I really compel people to play this over and listen to what Jim said again, because it is absolutely based in reason, total reason. And I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Jim. So let me just move on to a few other things that are in the news. This was a very strange notice that someone photographed. Looks like it was in some metro station, and it talked about the NYPD releasing small amounts of harmless, colorless gas in 5 boroughs and 21 subway lines. This airborne non-toxic test is part of NYPD's precaution against terror attacks. MTA.
Sounds like a drill to perform one, Louisa.
Yeah.
They want to see how effective it would be to conduct a chemical attack in the New York subway system. So they're conducting a drill to test out their plan before it's implemented. I find all this extremely offensive.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, and they're like, MTA customers are advised to stay calm. Really? We shouldn't be concerned that
Right.
someone, I don't know, Jim. I don't know what's going on here, but there's lots of other things in the news. So here was that one, Trump 17. We know who is Q, and there's lots of people out there who are starting this whole who is Q because they want so much the press to ask Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, the question, who is Q? And it's always been my long belief that Q is a military, intelligence around the president. And we don't know the name of the person, but we pretty much know that it's pretty much a position. And and I'm going to stay with that because there are many proofs, which I'm going to then show, um, that you should visit this website here, the GoldFish Report news page, because here it is. This is really important. I'm going to click on this. Let me know that you can see it, Jim, okay?
Yes, you can see
This
it.
is by Jason A. Wright 7. So this is a really important, if you want to look at whether or not you can validate Q as authentic, these are a series of proofs. Okay, and this is what Q would ask people to do: provide proofs, where you coordinate and you go back. Q always says future proofs past, so this is where you'll go back and you can validate that something that was Q had posted was later then posted by the president. So it always goes in that order. Okay, so you will, because you know, hindsight's 2020, right? Easy to play Monday morning quarterback. There are several of them. This has to do with Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner went ahead of time. This is not very big, so you can't see it. I'm sorry, you can't see it. But it says, why did Jared Kushner travel to Saudi Arabia recently? And here it says that he went to inform. Jared Kushner gave the Saudi crown prince CIA intelligence about other Saudis, saying, here are your enemies. And these were, which led to the corruption crackdown in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so we know that this was happening. We know that, you know, a lot of people were questioning why Jared Kushner went there, and this is why. So he went ahead of Trump to drop this intel. There's many of these proofs. American mercenaries. More of this leads to Saudi Arabia. This you're going to find very interesting. So here we have Q posting, who are the puppet masters, meaning the deep state. And then the House of Saud, you have, it's 6. So you have 3, he has the 3 plus signs, the Rothschild is 2, Soros is 1. And that makes a triangle. Okay, and this is really these are non-elected people, but these are who controls the politicians, because these are the people who have the money. And that's who controls the politicians. So keep going through this. Go through this link. Maybe I'll put this link in the description section so more viewers can go through these proofs. There's many of them. Look at how many there are. There's too many to discount. So I know Jim's going to have some opinion on this when we get to his slides. So I'm going to go back to our page here. You know, crazy stuff going on in the news. Wrong way driver crashes on I-66. Secret Service was there to investigate. Why would the Secret Service go and investigate a crash? Okay, so we don't know who was involved in that. Sadly, folks, there were some people who were ready to testify against Hillary Clinton, and I guess it was a nurse. So they had something to do with the pharma, how the pharmaceutical companies were in cahoots with these drugs and lowering price. You know, I think it had something to do with Haiti as well. I'm not quite sure, but she died. She recently died. There was an explosion in her home in New Jersey with her and her husband, and they're now. You can add that to the Clinton body count. Sadly. Did you hear about that, Jim?
No, I hadn't, but I'm not surprised.
Okay, yeah. So exactly, when somebody goes to testify against them, they usually end up dead. So you know, this is what you need to stay public. And then I'm just going to screen share this real quick. Again, like I said, there was no new Q, but what Q is we're in a preparation phase now. Now we're in another phase, and Q. I don't know who's doing this. There's actually a group of Anons putting these cards together, just like the Illuminati have their playing deck card. Well, now Q has his own playing deck card, and these are moves that he's making, and it's very interesting. And there's a whole bunch of these published on the GoldFish Report news page, so you can go there and take a look at those. But you know, basically they're saying, you know, you are learning how many coincidences before it becomes mathematically impossible. So that's what that proof link that I provided is going to show you. How many coincidences before it's mathematically impossible. And this is really what they do a very good job.
Strictly speaking, it should mean overwhelmingly improbable, because to be mathematically impossible means it's not even logically possible, meaning it couldn't be true just based upon language and logic alone. So since we're talking about empirical matters, he really means overwhelmingly improbable, but of course to use the phrase mathematically impossible is meant to convey that notion.
Okay, absolutely. And so there's lots of other news on the Goldfish Report page here. There's, it looks like Theresa May is going to be stepping down. Somebody was, I don't know how many more letters of no confidence, but we do know from the Benjamin Fulford report that, this is coming, the EU doesn't have support anymore. It's breaking up. Brexit's happening. It does look like that, Trump, as you know, is the art of the deal maker. So, you know, seizing these assets and these accounts and taking the money from the bad guys is how you stop all of this. You stop the provocateurs and the riots and all this other stuff. It's a monumental task, and thank God he has help doing it. Just so we also have. So here's the link on the page. And he's also having lunch with Vice President Pence today. So, whatever else, there's always going to be updates on the site here. I'm going to just go to Q real quick, to the Q page, and just show you that there hasn't been anything new since July 4th. We have photos here of, looks like maybe Prince Edward. I don't know. It actually looks almost like Prince William, but it might be Prince Edward crossing the street in what looks like this is Western Pacific Kindergarten. So people are.
That's William, not that's William.
It looked like William, but I couldn't tell. I didn't want to, I couldn't say for sure, but it does look like William. And that there is this connection here with the this building right here, showing that there's a Western Pacific Kindergarten. And someone did show close-up photos of this, which I did post on the page. And right beneath that is trafficking. It's like child brothel. There's a brothel right underneath there. There's a brothel there. So those pictures are posted on the Goldfish Report news page. There are way too many for me to share, so I can't share them all, or we just make the whole report on it. But let's take a look at this, because this is really important. I can't get this to expand. I'm sorry. Q had to post here, disinformation is real. Disinformation is necessary. So example, U.S. Military and non-government. Why was this necessary? What questions were asked regarding SA or Saudi Arabia events? Why is this relevant? Think, mirror, look there or there or there. Truth is behind you. So, this is a war that we're clearly in. We're clearly in a war. Call it World War III if you want, but it's an information war. It's a clandestine shadow war is what it is. And they can't publicize their moves. And sometimes the drops that they post, I mean, the bad guys are watching the drops too. So, sometimes they do have to mislead people in order to play their card, to play their hand. So this is the message I wanted to get out, because the Q proofs are very important. All right, there's things that are just, you just can't show your hand. You just can't do it. And I also wanted to make the point that this whole thing about the A1 scandal has to do with the fact that they're going to make him he's going to cooperate probably, and he's going to be a witness, and he's going to sing like a bird, and then we're going to start getting more and more and more information. But I just wanted to also comment that we had some posts up last week. They did come down. We did have some posts that were obtained from the internet, so they were already in the public regarding the DNC server leaks. There's no way for me to really verify these documents. I can only, trust that maybe these are the real documents. But whatever it was, we did talk about them in our last POTUS report. We also talked about them Friday in Country Roads with Winston Trout. We did talk about them. So you can find them in those two reports. I'm not going to reiterate them here. But I do presume there will be more coming out in the future. And because they are already available on the internet. So anybody can get them and pass them around. And they have been, in fact. There's been many links and many who brought them to my attention where they've been posted elsewhere as well. So it just means, folks, that the evidence is extremely damning, that it's all coming out, and that this is really what ultimately is going to take down the deep state, because they are criminals, they are war criminals, they are guilty of massive amounts of crime. And Benjamin Fulford, according to his report today, it's coming out that start to expect arrests in August. start to expect the disclosure of what really happened on 9/11 in September, and look for major financial news in October, along with perhaps a jubilee, a debt jubilee, which means debt forgiveness for mortgages, credit cards, and things of that nature. So we'll see. We'll hold Benjamin Fulford to that. And with that, I'm going to give this over to Jim so you can begin your report. Thank you.
Thanks, Louisa. I wish I didn't have to begin on such a somber note, but the Zionists seem to be in the position of executing a desperate false flag endeavor that merges a Samson option with a blackjack to simulate an Iranian nuclear suitcase attack in multiple Western capitals. A suggestion has been it would happen here in Chicago. Super hacker Guccifer thinks both Chicago and a city in Pennsylvania will be suitcase nuked. That would probably therefore be Philadelphia, where Guccifer had hacked into various crime syndicate email messages. I wish there were reason to think this is false. This guy, Robert David Steele, is a very smart guy with tremendous connections, and I'm sorry to say, I think you have to take what he reports as extremely serious. We have the massive migration continuing in Europe. 27 European and 28 African nations actually signed the Marrakesh Declaration to unbelievably increase immigration into Europe. On 2 May 2018, 27 officials from European countries and 28 African nations met in Morocco and signed the Marrakesh Political Declaration about creating new policies for handling immigration into Europe, though it's not to be confused with the Marrakesh Declaration of 2016, signed by more than 250 leaders and scholars in Muslim-majority countries. It nevertheless augurs very poorly, considering the following. It turns out there has been a plan on behalf of Jewish extremists to use Muslims by mass immigration to destroy Christianity in Europe. This is so bold and diabolical. I wish I could tell you that it's false, that it's phony, that it's fabricated, but this appears to be exactly what's going on. That the reason we're encountering a European refugee crisis is that it's all deliberate and contrived. And think of the genius. You have the three great Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, using the two that are non-Jewish, Islam, to crush the third, Christianity in Europe. That is truly a conception of supreme evil. We do have several European states that are very unhappy about immigration. Hungary has been striking back, resisting politically. Italy has been exposing that the immigration in Italy has been funded by George Soros, that there's a multiplicity of organizations surrounding the Open Society Foundation, right, which is the Soros entity, to promote it. And while they claim to have channels for free access to a country for job-seeking purposes, ways to make temporary visas permanent, to ease family reunion processes, and so forth, this all appears to be a political cover for deep state machinations that are inimical to the best interests of the European societies thereby affected.
Yeah, Jim, and it is a Soros. It's part of the New World Order agenda, and that's who the deep state is. And it looks like, sadly, people have to. We the people, whether you're in Britain or Germany or United States, wherever you are in the world, you have to hold these officials accountable. This is destroying our country. It's destroying our culture, and we have to make that decision, Jim, to now that we talked about, like, for the last 3 reports, Jim, that this whole immigration issue about children being separated at the border, as you pointed out, Jim, most of these kids those aren't their parents that they come with. These kids are planted. They're either part of child trafficking, or they're used for child trafficking, sex trafficking, perhaps. But they also are like they're like what do you call it? It's like a decoy where they get to bring the other parent in who's a criminal.
Well, you can see the gross hypocrisy and political shenanigans behind this when we're talking about a law that was signed by Bill Clinton, a policy enforced by Barack Obama, who separated 90,000 children from their parents.
Right.
And the press and the public said nothing about it. And yet we have hysteria over Trump simply acting in accordance with a law separating 2,000 kids. He's already signed an executive order to reverse it. But you think it was going on apace to hear the hysteria from the Democrats and their media allies. The propaganda has been unrelenting.
He's Teflon Don, let me tell you. Deep State Palooka doesn't stand a chance against Teflon Don because Deep State Palooka they fail. You know, these are their plans to create unrest, Jim, and it just fails.
And look how they're trying to continue to embarrass Trump. You can have a giant balloon and a President Trump as a baby wearing a diaper over the British Parliament building in Westminster when he's there for a 3-day visit. This was approved by the mayor of London, who happens to be a Muslim. Knife crime, moped muggings, and housing prices soar to the heights of the Gershkin mayor is only interested in making a crude and public statement about the President of the United States. This form of adolescent and personal politics belongs in the halls of a university, not in the leadership of the world's largest financial capital. After all, only recently Britain hosted the visit of the hardline and repressive leader of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. No giant balloons went up for him. As the UK extracts itself from the European Union, we'll need our allies across the pond, no matter who their political leader may be or what party they come from. This is a bond that transcends party politics or individual personalities. Like him or loathe him, President Trump is coming to London. We cannot kick and scream and pretend he isn't. We need to behave like the adult nation we are and work with him, as is in our national interest. Very fascinating stuff. We also have, in another part of the world, efforts to undermine the summit with North Korea. It appears that the visit by Pompeo there have not improved matter. He claims that sanctions on North Korea will remain until verified denuclearization. He urged the North to follow the Vietnamese path after Pyongyang accused the U.S. of making gangster-like demands. North Korea has, in fact, been very, very unhappy. The previous two Pompeo visits and other high-profile meetings were all runaway successes, and the expectation was this would simply be another. Instead, North Korea came out of the talk saying the whole 2-day visit was regrettable, and they find America's attitude toward the diplomatic process extremely troubling. They said the U.S. was not following the spirit of the Kim-Trump summit. It was just making demands through Pompeo's visit. This is all very, very troubling, Louisa. Well, once again, there are a lot of powerful interests who, just as they don't want relations to improve with Russia, don't want relations to improve with North Korea either. So
absolutely, Jim.
They're doing their best to undermine on all fronts.
Absolutely. And I think that these things are also temporary. You know, remember after the summit was announced and it was agreed to, remember Kim Jong-un had pulled out, and because there was, he was concerned about, why are you in this, how can you be in the spirit of asking me to denuclearize when you're still carrying out drills with the South Koreans? And so, military drills with the South Koreans. So, it stopped, and there's probably some other issues involved in that as well. But it's all about diplomacy. It's all about, political posturing,
I think you got it right, Louisa. Here we have a fascinating piece by Patrick J. Buchanan. The Never Trumpers are never coming back. This is very, very significant. He's saying the Republican Party of Bush 1 and 2 of Bob Dole and John McCain is history. It's not coming back. Unlike the Bourbons and the Revolution and the terror after Napoleon and the Empire, no restoration is in the cards. The failures that killed the Bush Party represented departure from Reaganite traditionalism and conservatism, or first, the hubristic drive, despite the warning of statesmen like George Kennan, to exploit our Cold War victory and pursue a policy of permanent containment of Russia, which had lost a third of its territory and half its people due to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We moved NATO into Eastern Europe and the Baltic onto our doorstep. We abrogated the ABM treaty Nixon had negotiated, moved defensive missiles into Poland, John McCain pushed to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO and even to send U.S. forces to face off against Russian troops. Thus, we got a second Cold War that need never have begun, that our allies seem content to let us fight alone. Europe today is not afraid of Vladimir Putin reaching the Rhine. Europe is afraid of Africa and the Middle East reaching the Danube, meaning through the migrant invasion. Let the Americans who relish playing empire pay for NATO. Second, in a reflexive response to 9/11, we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, dumped over the regime in Libya, armed rebels to overthrow Bashir Assad in Syria, and backed Saudi intervention in a Yemeni civil war, creating a humanitarian crisis in that poorest of Arab countries that is exceeded in horrors only by the Syrian civil war. Since Y2K, hundreds of thousands in the Middle East have perished, the ancient Christian community has all but ceased to exist, and the refugees now number in the millions. What are the gains for democracy from these wars, all backed enthusiastically by the Republican establishment? Why are the people responsible for these wars still being listened to rather than confessing their sins at second thought conferences? The GOP elite also played a crucial role in throwing open U.S. markets to China and ceding transnational corporations full freedom to move factories and jobs there and ship their Chinese-made goods back here free of charge. Beijing swept past Italy, France, Britain, Germany, and Japan to become the premier manufacturing power on earth and a geostrategic rival. Now from East Africa to Sri Lanka and the Indian Ocean, and from South and East China Sea to Taiwan, Beijing's expansionist ambitions have become clear. And where are the Republicans responsible for building up this potentially malevolent power that thieves our technology? Talking of building a Reagan-like Navy to contain the mammoth they nourish? Since the Cold War, America's elites have been exhibiting symptoms of that congenital blindness associated since Rome with declining and falling empires. While GOP grassroots have begged for measures to control our bleeding southern border, they were regularly denounced as nativists by party elites, many of whom are now backing Trump's walls. For decades, America's elite failed to see that the transnational movement of the post-Cold War era was passing, and an era of rising nationalism and tribalism was at hand. And here we have yet another report from the ghastly war in Yemen, where the Saudis have been attacking, even using what appear to be tactical nuclear weapons on the Houthis, who are trying to establish democracy in Yemen, where the United States once again has been on the wrong side of history by providing Saudi Arabia with these weapons of mass destruction. It's simply appalling, shocking, and pathetic.
Yeah, there's, and I think that we have to, before we have this global currency reset, we have to have this, which is imminent, actually, and of course, according to Benjamin Fulford, also, they've got to stop this fighting. I mean, if there's pockets still, the deep state is not going to give up. They're going to fight until they take their last breath, even though they know they're losing. There's no question. Right now, the UK is scared to death. People over in, let's see, Leon Panetta, according to Benjamin Fulford, we have former U.S. Defense Secretary and trader Leon Panetta saying European leaders are scared to death that the U.S. troops will be pulled out of Europe, and they should be scared to death since they are mostly war criminals who would have been jailed and possibly even executed if the U.S. military were not protecting them. So it just seems like, and of course NATO is, the new acronym for NATO is North Atlantic Terrorist Organization, because they really have never done anything, nor has the United Nations to ever, what has the UN done, Jim? Anything? Have they ever done anything to really stop any of this bloodshed? In fact, no, because the UN's job is to bring out and execute the New World Order, because the evidence of their actions support that. They have never gone into an area and ever did anything beneficial that was in any way, meaningful.
Regarding the UN, I'm reminded of Gandhi's response when asked what he thought of Western civilization. He replied, he thought it was a good idea. I feel the same about the United Nations. It's a good idea, but in execution, it has performed very, very poorly indeed.
Right.
And therefore has become a massive disappointment, sad to say.
Like everything, even in the government, and I hope people in Europe and across the world realize that it wasn't the American people that even knew what these deep state operatives were really doing. So, I hope they realize that there was a coup in our government, and it started a long time ago when Eisenhower warned us of the military-industrial complex, when Kennedy warned us of this plot to enslave every man, woman, and child. He told us this, and it never went away. And now we have President Trump again, and let's hope three is a charm, that he's finally going to arrest this malevolent force that is that's a warmongering and benefits and profits from the war, and let's have peace.
There are a lot of those who still don't understand that the United States created ISIS. It was done by Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and John Brennan when he was head of the CIA over the objections of Michael Flynn, who was then the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency back in 2012, in order to put pressure on Assad and eventually confront the Persian nation of Iran. So here's the United States not only not opposing terrorism, but creating an absolutely vicious terrorist army. Questions have been raised about whether the U.S. has surrendered to Putin in Syria. Well, frankly, we had no business being in Syria. It was another gross mistake, part of the whole reaction to 9/11, which was engineered to bring the United States into the Middle East on behalf of Israel to take out the modern Arab states that serve as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region. We do have arrangements about Iranian-backed forces staying at least 80 kilometers from the Israeli border on the Golan Heights. Israel will have tacit Russian permission to attack threatening Russian targets in Syria. Assad's army, backed by Russian air power, will consolidate control in southwest Syria. Russian military police will patrol areas of southwest Syria and perhaps other regions. Russia and the Assad regime will expand their outreach to Syrian Kurdish forces. All of this appears to have taken place. This is very powerful. It even looks as though there is an agreement between the Kurds and the Syrians to get the Turks out of Syria, because the Turkeys are there. The Turkish forces are there to try to take control of Syrian territory. A very fascinating article about what's going on here, published on 4th of July. History will omit the fact that Libya is now a den of iniquity, a failed state battling slavery, mass migration, prostitution, drug cartels, and the inevitable sectarian extremist warlords who rule mafia style over the vanquished nation. This is democracy? I guess for the American exceptionalist nation, bombing to bring peace as a downside after all, but history will put that right when it's written by the perpetrators who heap universal misery on the Libyan people in the sacrosanct name of democracy. Syria is another story. The Syrians have confounded the U.S. and its allies at every turn, every plan B. Syria has responded with unity, resistance, and pride in its independence and territorial integrity. Syria has upheld international law, has called upon its historical allies, and they have responded to the consternation of Western policy designers. The multitude of alleged narrative pushers and history writers cut their Syrian cloth long ago, but they failed to incorporate the rich tapestry of Syrian society, which has survived centuries of foreign invasion and influence and emerged victorious. When history writers in the West have been posed to sketch the fall of the Syrian government, torn asunder by the prefabricated Arab Spring uprising, the Syrian people have pushed back against a stream of invective that threatened their secular existence, their right to determine their own future. They have refused to succumb to the narrative concocted for them by the war hawks and the neocons in Congress. The Syrian people have fought back and sacrificed everything to make their history their own. What we see now is a desperate scramble by policymakers in the U.S., aided and abetted by their aligned media, think tanks, and policy institutions, to respond to the truth expansion that is stealing their lies and burying them beneath an awkward political public consensus. What can they do to regain the moral high ground? They built their foreign policy hopes on a morass of extremist and terrorist groups, which have converted Syria's landscape into a shattered, craggy lunar warscape, littered with reminders of the U.S. coalition's failure to bring this proud nation to her knees. In a 2006 article that appeared in Time entitled Syria in Bush's Crosshairs, the Bush administration has been quietly nurturing individuals and parties opposed to the Syrian government in an effort to undermine the regime of President Bashar Assad, reminiscent of what they did vis-a-vis Iraq and Saddam Hussein.
Right.
Parts of the scheme are outlined in a classified two-page document that says the U.S. already is supporting regular meetings of internal and diaspora Syrian activists in Europe. The documents bluntly express the hope that these meetings will facilitate a more coherent strategy and plan of action for all anti-Assad activists. The source of evidence of a planned regime change in Syria are undeniable and overwhelming. The redacted DIA agency documents, WikiLeaks, Roland Dumas exposing a British plot to release CIA documents, bring real muscle to bear against Syria, 1983. Professor Jeffrey Sachs discussing Operation Timber Sycamore on NBC. We know they sent in the CIA to overthrow Assad. There is a history of CIA intervention in Syria stretching back into the last century. If any of these history rewriters actually bothered to read history, they might find it rich in source material, but it goes against the grain to consider them historical fact when their version of history depends upon it being relegated to conspiracy theorism. The current geopolitical somersault being executed by the history writers in the U.S. is Donald Trump's apparent willingness to cut a deal with Vladimir Putin in Syria in what appears to be an attempt to weaken Iranian influence in the cradle of resistance against Western meddling. The regime change project is a failure, and now we see the damage limitation teams being deployed. History must not register a defeat. It must be recalibrated for the U.S. alliance to maintain a veneer of respectability. The glorious, upstanding U.S. coalition must not be seen limping from the battlefield. The history writers are effectively feeling the impact of having the pen wrested from their grip by those who will reveal the hidden facts, context, and diverging views. History is being rewritten by the people who denied the history shapers their victory, being written by those that U.S. history would have us dehumanize, discount, marginalize, being written by the true conquerors in Syria who ensure a kinder history for humanity in the future. Just a wonderful critique, Louisa.
Oh, it was very thorough. And I'm sitting here thinking, that there was some other, it was triggering some information I had read from some of that intel that I saw on social media regarding this idea of regime change. Of course, it is a complete failure, although sadly they did succeed with Iraq. They succeeded in Libya. And from those documents that I had looked at, it looked like Ambassador Stevens knew about this plan to use sarin gas against the Lebanese people. And that's why he was taken out. That's why there was a stand down order issued, because that was the plan there. The plan was to use it on the people and then blame Gaddafi for it, and then have a reason to go in and kick him out.
I have no doubt that history will eventually reflect that Ambassador Stevens was an heroic figure, and
yes.
Hillary Clinton a monster of depravity of
Right.
almost unimaginable
Right.
proportions.
Right. And it just seems like also, I think it was Vince Foster too, who constantly came up against Hillary Clinton from some of the documents I was reading, and that he wasn't a game player. He wasn't with this agenda. Like, there were people, and we have to realize there are people within the administration. These are the military guys who are working with President Trump, who were never going to go along with these neocon, Khazarian infiltrators of our country. And they're working with them now.
Here we have revelations. John McCain's staff member urged IRS to bankrupt grassroots conservative groups. In other words, John McCain has been undermining the independence and integrity of groups within the Republican Party. The explosive exchange was contained in notes taken by IRS employees at an April 30th, 2013, involving high-ranking IRS officials and John McCain. It's really shocking what we find here. Here's yet a second article about it from the American Thinker. How is this for sneaky Senator John McCain, not too long after seeking conservative and Republican votes for his failed 2008 bid for the presidency, went right after those same conservative voters without telling them by egging on the IRS to ruin them. This is the quality of the man. He's a despicable person. He is reported to have sung like a canary when the North Vietnamese had him as a captive and betrayed his fellow prisoners of war. Until now, the author writes, I've always been under the impression that some conservatives' negative views of John McCain were overblown, that he was far more good than bad. I was wrong. The Obama administration scheme to repress the Tea Party is a big reason why the Obama administration went downhill in the minds of many voters. Not only was Lois Lerner not punished for clearly illegally targeting political dissidents, one of the blackest marks in the Obama record, but was also allowed to get away with it, taking the fifth in Congress to the whitewashed official report finding no wrongdoing, to illegally deleting and losing emails, some of which found were profoundly hostile to conservatives, to being allowed to retire comfortably at her Beltway suburb mansion with a six-figure pension. That was the price she paid for persecuting dissidents in exactly the same crummy, sleazy, slimy third world way as dictators do. She got away with it, but only because she had help in, of all people, John McCain, that famous champion of dissidents in hellholes across the third world. What a hypocrite. We're still a lying hypocrite. Judicial Watch had been on to McCain for a long time, coming up with earlier evidence that he served in as accomplice to get the Tea Party groups and that he lied, that none of it was true. What he's doing now, claiming he never met his top aide, Henry Kerner, in the record, McCain's man Kerner said he wanted them ruined. The whole repression of the Tea Party apparatus by refusing to allow them to operate tax-exempt organizations the way leftist groups do has long been considered a Chicago-style political manipulation that swung the 2012 election away from Mitt Romney to President Obama, who, after muscling through the detested Obamacare, was expected to be punished by voters. Repressing the Tea Party was a big reason why Trump got such a battery charge by 2016, because Trump was perceived as a fighter. Now we have a report about Rod Rosenstein blackmailing members of Congress. It's fascinating, but after having been grilled by Jim Jordan, Rod Rosenstein didn't look very good. Just days, it didn't take long for Heinrich Himmler lookalike Rod Rosenstein to get even with Representative Jim Jordan's hardline questioning during the House Judicial Committee hearing recently, where Jordan and Rosenstein got into heated discussion over Rosenstein's refusal to turn over politically sensitive documents on Robert Mueller's investigation. Just days later, Representative Jim Jordan was named by Ohio State wrestler Mike DeSabo as having known about the alleged abuse of athletes by Dr. Richard Strauss, who was a team physician from the mid-1970s to the late 1990s, an accusation Jordan denied. But it gets even worse. Get this, Representative Jim Jordan's nephew killed in a car crash just after a political attack.
That's right.
It's come after attack this week after grilling Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Those attacks have grown louder in the past couple of days, and now news has broken that his 21-year-old nephew has been killed in a car crash. Eli Stickley, who was a University of Wisconsin wrestler and a former state high school champion in Ohio in 2012, died in a car crash on Thursday in Illinois. The Dayton Daily News reported, according to Indiana State Police, Stickley was driving a black 2004 Nissan Frontier headed west on Interstate 74 in Henry County. The Nissan left the road into a right-hand ditch, overcorrected, and rolled across the westbound lanes of traffic. Stickley and a passenger was not identified were taken to Illinois Hospital in Silvis, where Stickley was pronounced dead. His uncle, Representative Jim Jordan, won 2 national championships at Wisconsin, was a 3-time All-American, remains the school's all-time wins leader. Jordan's son, Isaac, wrapped up his own All-American career in 2017, wrestling alongside cousin Stickley. Following the death, the wrestling team posted a statement. I just say, these do not look coincidental. It all looks appalling. Anyone with an IQ above moron can see this accusation involving Jordan in a 20-year-old incident as a payback for Rosenstein over Jordan's hardline demand for evidence, even something that should be More alarming is the American people is a distinct probability that Rosenstein is digging up dirt on every representative who's demanding proof from him. While everyone waits on Rosenstein to turn over such documents he's spending his time trying to find something negative on every lawmaker who has demanded answers from him. By threatening these lawmakers with possibly career-ending dirt, he hopes to blackmail his way back to an end for any demands made by Congress. Louise, that's simply disgusting, but just what we should expect from people who are in deep trouble, who have been in collusion with Hillary Clinton and the DNC and the Department of Justice and the FBI for a very long time. Profound corruption right at the core of the deep state.
Well, many people are wondering, Jim, why, with all of this evidence coming out, and why hasn't the high-level people been arrested yet? Where's Rod Rosenstein now? I mean, he had 6 days, right, from the time it was announced to either turn over those documents or be impeached. So, I haven't heard the latest on this. I don't know if he turned over those documents, because the documents would implicate him. Either way, he's toast, because the documents would implicate him as being part of the, the dossier stuff. It's just kind of crazy. But, his wife is one of Hillary Clinton's. There was a report, I read a report, several reports, that his wife is Hillary Clinton's attorney.
Yeah, it's just disgraceful. This whole Hillary thing is unbelievably awful.
Right.
Here we get a report now. This comes from the DNC. CNN just made our hearts drop. Most GOP voters think Mueller's Russia probe is a witch hunt. Robert Mueller has been dragged through the mud by Republicans so much that now voters are supporting Trump. No! This is awful news for our chances to take back the House. Voters may side with Trump just to smear Robert Mueller. But Robert Mueller's completely corrupt. Look at this campaign. Give us free health care, jobs, no taxes, house, food. You owe us, America. We will shoot more police in Arizona until we get free. These are the kind of people the Democrats are standing with. We have gay men walking away from the collapsing Democratic Party and its repulsive hatred, intolerance, and bigotry. This is very significant. Gay men were once accepted as liberal by the Democrats, but they're now targeted by an increasingly lunatic, deranged leftist party that openly attacks people for being white or male. Mm-hmm. Vandals have thrown a brick through the window of the Nebraska Republican Party's headquarters in Lincoln, Nebraska. We have prominent Democrats across the country whipping up support for abolishing U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement and appeal to their left-wing base. And another similar act of suspected political terrorism, the Orange County Republican Party headquarters in October was firebombed, and Nazi Republicans leave town, or else was painted with a swastika on an adjacent building. Louisa, I think that the extreme left wing here has gone so far over the edge that they are indeed repulsing normal Americans. The middle class is not going to be sympathetic or tolerant of this kind of extreme misbehavior. So while they may indulge in an orgy of self-gratification, it's not playing well. I think they have destroyed their prospects of regaining the House or the Senate in the midterm election.
They destroyed their party. Are you kidding me? They destroyed the party. There's no Democrat Party anymore. So the Pound Walk Away movement there's a big group, there's like 100,000 already on Facebook, and everybody is posting a story. You only join it if you really want to be part of that, and join and tell your story while you're walking away, and it's wonderful. People are waking up to it. You're absolutely right, Jim. They're not tolerating it. They are destroying the not only did they destroy the Democratic Party, it's gone. I don't think people realize something's really wrong. And maybe they're going to start thinking, well, that conspiracy theorist is right. Jim, about your conspiracy?
Well, they're on every side. You find nothing but conspiracies taking place. How can anyone have a serious doubt about it? Now,
exactly.
Facebook is deleting accounts at the direction of the U.S. and Israeli government. In September of last year, we noted Facebook representatives were meeting with the Israeli government to determine which Facebook accounts of Palestinians should be deleted on the ground they constituted incite. The meetings, called for and presided over by one of the more extremist and authoritarian Israeli officials, pro-settlement Justice Minister Eilat Shaked, came after Israel threatened Facebook that it's failed to voluntarily comply with Israeli deletion orders would result in the enactment of laws requiring Facebook to do so upon pain of being severely fined or even blocked in the country. This is just disgusting beyond belief. The predictable results are now clear and well documented. Facebook has been on a censorship rampage against Palestinian activists who protest a decades-long illegal Israeli occupation, all directed and determined by Israeli officials themselves. Indeed, they have been publicly boasting about how obedient Facebook is when it comes to Israeli censorship orders. Shortly after news broke earlier this month of the agreement between the Israeli government and Facebook, Israeli Justice Minister Eilat Shaked said Tel Aviv had submitted 158 requests to the social media giant the previous 4 months asking to remove content it deemed incitement. She said Facebook had granted 95% of the requests. She's right. The submission to Israeli dictates is hard to overstate. As the New York Times put it in December of last year, Israeli security agencies monitor Facebook and said the company posts they consider incitement. Facebook has responded by removing most of them. What makes this censorship particularly consequential is 96% of Palestinians said their primary use of Facebook was to follow the news. This means Israeli officials have virtually unfettered control over a key communication component for Israelis. Facebook now seems to be explicitly admitted it also intends to follow the censorship orders of the U.S. government. Earlier this week, the company deleted the Facebook and Instagram accounts of Ramzan Kadyrov, the repressive, brutal, and authoritarian leader of the Czech Republic, who had combined 4 million followers on those accounts. To put it mildly, Kadyrov, who was given free rein to rule in the province in exchange for ultimate loyalty to Moscow, is the opposite of a sympathetic figure. He's been credibly accused of a wide range of horrific human rights violations, from the imprisonment and torture of LGBTs to the kidnapping, killing of dissidents. But none of that dilutes how disturbing and dangerous Facebook's rationale for its deletion of his accounts. A Facebook spokesman told the Times the company deleted these accounts not because he's a mass murderer and tyrant, but because he had been added to a United States sanctions list that the company was legally obligated to follow. As the Times noted, this rationale appears dubious or at least inconsistently applied. Others on the same sanctions list, such as Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, remain active on Facebook and Instagram, but consider the incredibly menacing implication of Facebook's claims. It is, as is always true of censorship, there is one and only one principle driving all of this power. Facebook will submit to and obey the censorship demands of governments and officials who actually wield power over it while ignoring those who do not. That's why declared enemies of the U.S. and Israeli government are vulnerable to censorship measures by Facebook. Whereas U.S. and Israeli officials and their most tyrannical and repressive allies are not. All of this illustrates the same severe damage from state censorship are raised at least as much by the pleas for Silicon Valley giants to do more active censoring of bad speech. Calls for state censorship may often be well-intentioned, the desire to protect marginalized groups from damaging hate speech, yet predictably, they are far more often used against marginalized groups to censor them rather than protect them. One need only look at how hate speech laws are used in Europe on U.S. college campuses to see that censorship victims are often critical of European wars, or activists against Israeli occupation, or advocates for minority rights. Here we see a positive sign. Some 60 organizations are considering a lawsuit against the Southern Poverty Law Center, owing a $3 million settlement. Louisa, this is all completely disgusting because the social media giants are engaged in massive censorship, violating their compact with the public when they were created. They should be exerting no censorship whatsoever. All views, regardless of how extreme or hateful, ought to be made available and let the public decide, let the people determine the truth for themselves.
Well, Jim, isn't that why we have these options for security and in Facebook, so that you can, choose to see what you want to see, whose posts you want to post, who you want to follow. We're supposed to be able to monitor that ourselves. If we don't like something that we see, we can unfollow it or we can not look at it. I mean, so we're supposed to be able to do that ourselves,
Yeah.
But I also wanted to make a comment about your comment about the think tanks and the political institutions running the policy. I mean, people have to really realize that it's just a dog and pony show when it comes to constituents. Very rarely is your concern ever on their desk. And if it is, it gets filed in the special place, right? Right, Jim? In the special file. So this is all about pay to play, which we also showed about Algeria, which was one of those documents that we had found on social media and talked about it in our report, that even Algeria wanted to pay the Clinton Foundation in order to get taken off the terror watch list.
We're getting further revelations confirming what we have been reporting steadily ever since we went on the air about these false flag attacks. Boston bomber's lawyers begin fight to save his life. Legal team demands to see FBI interview with Saranov's friend in a bid to spare him the death penalty. We already know he had nothing to do with it. I have a whole book about it. Nobody died in Boston either. The police were on bullhorns calling out, "This is a drill, this is a drill." The Boston Globe was tweeting that a demonstration bomb would be set off during the marathon for the benefit of bomb squad activities. Another tweet that one would be set off in a minute in front of the library, and a minute later in front of the Boston Public Library, an explosion took place. As a former Marine Corps artillery officer, these were puff pieces. They were intended to be dramatic in effect, but to cause no injuries. We know, of course, we've identified those who actually planted the bombs. They were Kraft International personnel wearing khaki trousers and black jackets. The brothers had nothing to do with it. Their images were even photoshopped in. Here we have Alex Jones, subject to an absurd lawsuit. The problem is that the attorneys representing him appear to be in on the take. This is James Tracy just having published how a talk show host can help defeat the First Amendment. I published the following comment this morning as further confirmation for James Tracy's inference. When I read the piece in the New York Times attacking Alex Jones' legal team, I reached out to them and offered my assistance and that of other experts on Sandy Hook. I wrote using the firm's online contact medium, but also called and left a voicemail message for Mark Randazza. When I published a blog about it, New York Times article attacking attorneys for Alex Jones' an absurd Sandy Hook lawsuit, and distributed the complete article, which includes proof that Noah Posner was a fiction made out of photographs of his purported old brother, Michael Vadner. I added him to the email list. He cannot possibly be unaware of the breadth and depth of evidence that the school was closed by 2008, that there were no students there, and that it was done to promote gun control. The first obligation of the plaintiffs in this case, one would surmise, would be to establish under the rules of evidence for legal proceedings that children had actually died at Sandy Hook, which they would be unable to do. My inferences are going to treat the fabricated deaths of children and adults as a matter of common knowledge, everyone knows to be the case, which will add one more absurdity to the case, since Alex Jones is being tried for doubting that claim, which therefore cannot possibly be common knowledge. Not only has Alex never invited me or other experts on Sandy Hook, just as James Tracy, onto his show, but his associate Jerry Corsi dismissed my offer of long-standing to provide extensive evidence and expert testimony for multiple students of Sandy Hook, virtually out of hand. That bothered me at the time. More recently, I was about to guest host on the Power Hour, and impressed by his new book, Killing the Deep State 2018, invited him to be my featured guest. He displayed a notable lack of enthusiasm for the idea, but reluctantly agreed to come on the show. A few hours early in the day, however, he called to emphasize he did not want to talk about Sandy Hook. I decided to drop Jerry and move up my second guest, Joe Olson, to talk about new research on 9/11. InfoWars charade has endured long enough. And here, this is just an example of the proof that was right in the article about the New York Times article, where you can see that Noah Posner was fabricated out of photographs of his older stepbrother, Michael Vadner, who's alive and well and publishing his own website. Now we have the interesting development that Broward Sheriff Scott Israel is being removed this week, it appears. Rather fascinating stuff. We proved, of course, that it was a charade. Here you see from a 52-second clip from inside a classroom where they used a training dummy that has no head and no arms and fake blood I've spelled all this out many places. If you want more, check out the Parkland puzzle, how the pieces fit together on 153news.net. We have more revelation, about March for Our Lives having been planned months before the shooting took place. We have even a confirmation from Officer Scott Earhart that the permit for the March for Our Lives demonstration in the District of Columbia, which was conducted on March 24, 2018, was applied several months prior to the actual event, not on or after the shooting on April 14th, where they dismissed the kids early because it was Valentine's Day. There's a new video study, absolutely wonderful, about Las Vegas loose chips that confirms that the whole thing was a theatrical production. As I put it most concisely, Las Vegas was a movie. And that's, of course, what MGM does. They make movies. So, Louisa, we're getting further confirmation about these false flags. It's coming out in many different directions. Very powerful confirmation of everything we have been reporting again and again and again.
That's huge news, though. That's big news about the sheriff resigning, and that is validation that, I guess, look, we need to get these, I want it to happen yesterday like everybody else does, Jim, but we need to have these sealed indictments, which now number way over 40,000, we need to see these arrests start happening, because the problem is they keep killing people and they really should be off the street. They've killed enough people. They need to be off the street now so that they can't communicate with their minions, and they don't have access to their funds, and people can now start to be free to talk about this stuff without fear of being retaliated against. Because I can tell you, Jim, these poles outside my house, I feel like they're frying me. I wake up with headaches every single day, and I'm just letting our viewers know that I have no plans on going anywhere and disappearing. Okay, so
you're doing a great job, Louise, and they're harassing you because you're annoying them by getting out too much truth. Further about Sheriff Israel, he didn't resign. He's being removed involuntarily, and there's a clue to why that happened. When I began publishing about Parkland, I would do my most important articles on a mass distribution, and I deliberately included members of the Broward Sheriff's Office and the Broward Department of Education. So they have known this was all fabricated and fake. And they may not offer that as their explanation, but I guarantee you that's what's going on. They've specifically cited his enthusiasm for gun control being photographed with Debbie Wasserman Schultz with Hillary Clinton and promoting the agenda, which was part and parcel of the whole charade.
Well, it's the Democratic Party's, done itself in. Let's let's look at this, gun control.
Well, this is how absurd it gets. The New York Times is now asking 12th graders their opinion on guns. What opinion is a 12th grader going to have on guns? I mean, this is moronic. This is the New York Times, for crying out loud. This is supposed to be one of the world's great newspapers indulging in propaganda.
No.
Will this reality checkup on mass shootings wake up anti-gunners? In the mainstream media, the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, is taken very seriously. People pay attention when they see blood or people are injured. Mass shootings are therefore big news. But should we be making a big deal about them? Before you get emotional, take a deep breath and read what I'm writing before you assume I don't care. Children have been killed. I do care about that. What I'm saying, though, is we need to get the situation in perspective of reality instead of making emotional decisions about a difficult issue. So what is the proper perspective? If you assume these are real, which we know they were not, 27 students and staff were killed by mass murder in the U.S. schools this year. That is revolting. It shocks us, as it should. It's also true that we don't know how to make sense of that number. There are almost 327 million of us here in the U.S. 57 million attend school in grades K through 12. Is 27 murders a large number or a small one? How many of us die by other causes? Let's put the numbers into perspective. 156 people were murdered by gunfire in Chicago this year. There are only 9.6 million people living in the Chicago metropolitan area. It's an interesting comparison, but the results are shocking. You are over 100 times more likely to be killed with a gun in Chicago than to be killed by a mass murder in a U.S. school. Think about that. If anti-gunners really want to protect children, why aren't they protesting and rioting about gun violence in Chicago, which already has some of the strictest gun control laws in the United States? It makes absolutely no sense. Maybe we should blame the media. After all, they haven't given us other relevant information either, like this. The results from government reports say guns are used 200 times in self-defense for each time a gun is used in a homicide, and the vast majority of homicides are suicides. Women use firearms to stop sexual assaults over 500 times a day. Why don't you know that? That's a great question. Why don't we know that? You can bet that anti-gunners don't know this information either, through their steady diet of mainstream media biased talking points. The truth is there on the table. The fact of the matter is that guns save many more lives than they take. Never back down from asserting your right to keep and bear arms. And here we have even James Comey, no less, more guns for peasants. During a recent interview, he was calling for more gun control against the peasants, not for the ruling class he was part of for so long. He said the NRA propagates lies in order to keep Americans armed against their rulers. Surely there are things we can agree upon that relate to who's able to buy a weapon, what kind of weapon, at what age, what the capabilities of a weapon are, how many rounds it holds, things like that. In no way threatening the right under the Constitution to keep and bear arms, Comey said during an interview in the United Kingdom. He specifically mentioned the NRA's opposition to gun control opinions he's pushing in the wake of the attack on since Sandy Hook and ever since. Selling fear, unlike the government, which literally sells fear of gun rights to the left and then demands Americans simply disarmed to be at the whim of those who claim the right to rule over them. The irony of that could cure the world of anemia.
Yeah, Trump.
Iron in the irony.
Exactly. Trump said he's not going to, give up the Second Amendment, so we can just forget about that. But back to the New York Times comment I wanted to make. Also, in Benjamin Fulford's report today, he has stated that the battle rages as Trump's super elite stop Bush operative Brett Kavanaugh and may succeed in getting a woman nominated, he said. The situation has reached the point where the New York Times has actually called for Godfather tactics and armed rebellion because Trump and his backers were poised to take over the Supreme Court. That's reported on Breitbart. Do not be surprised if military police soon occupy that treasonous papers' offices, since they have consistently and criminally suppressed the truth about the murder of 3,000 New Yorkers on September 11th, 2001. Such a move would be long overdue.
I got news for the New York Times, Louisa. There are 100 million armed Americans, and they did not vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, there you go. Bada bing. Bada bang, bada bing.
Trump threatens to release 9/11 docs implicating the Clintons and the Bushes, sends a warning to Mueller and the deep state. Trump is prepared to go beyond exposing special counsel Robert Mueller's 9/11 Saudi cover-up by releasing new information on the Bushes and Clintons were involved, according to high-level government sources. Bear in mind, Mueller was appointed director of the FBI ahead of 9/11. He stepped down as director after the Boston Marathon. He was in office during the Sandy Hook hoax and, of course, did nothing to explain it. We've had Scott Bennett, who's quite a brilliant whistleblower, former U.S. Army PSYOP officer, one-time assistant to 9/11 suspect Dov Zakheim, discussing how he, along with former Wolfowitz colleague Michael Maloff and former CIA officer Philip Giraldi, met with unidentified Iranian officials in Iran last month and urged them to expose the real 9/11 criminals in an American courtroom because they've been a finding against Iran requiring the public to pay $6 billion in reparation. It's simply completely absurd. Interestingly, we have, this contrast. We must never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. We were told by George W. Bush out of one side of his mouth, while out of the other he asserted cave-dwelling Arabs outwitted all our security services and conspired to destroy 3 skyscrapers with 2 airplanes by melting steel beams with jet fuel. Robert David Steele is publishing a series of one-page memoranda for the government. These are quite brilliant. You can find them on his website, but also on mine. I'm republishing. Here's the first from him. Memorandum for the President, 9/11 domestic false flag operations and your legacy. Here's another authored by me, 3 proofs we've not been told the truth about 9/11. Here's another by Joe Olson, who's a civil and structural engineer. Memorandum for the president. The Twin Towers were destroyed using clean nukes, WTC-7 with conventional demolitions. Here's another from David Ray Griffin. Memorandum for the president, proposal for a presidential 9/11 Truth Summit. This is very significant stuff. One more from Christopher Bolin. Memorandum for the president, 9/11 and the war on terror, Israel's history of false flag operations against the United States. Louisa, this is very significant stuff. Anyone who wants an overview, if they're not up to date, check out on BitChute 9/11, who is responsible and why, a 2-hour, very comprehensive overview of the big picture about 9/11, Louisa.
Right. Well, you know, when they say clean nukes, are they talking about mini nukes? What are they talking about clean nukes?
Well, this is very interesting. These are very sophisticated, relatively small nukes that had not on the order of the 150 kiloton that have sometimes been proposed that would have leveled lower Manhattan.
Right.
But ones that only involved a few pounds of uranium. They were channeled upward from the bedrock up the core column. What you have to appreciate is the design of the Twin Towers was a tube within a tube. So you had these massive core columns that were taken out by the initial explosion upward, and then the effect was to demolish the outer of the building. So what we actually saw visually was the outer of the building, which came down respectively in 9 seconds and 11 seconds for the south and the north, while the buildings were being converted into millions of cubic yards of very fine dust, leaving no massive pile of debris in their footprint, completely unlike Building 7, where you had the classic result of a controlled demolition, 5.5 floors equal to 12% of the original 47 floors. I think we're getting very, very close to having nailed this, and that Robert David Steele is doing a brilliant job of putting these memoranda together. He has good contacts, and he intends to get them to Trump before he meets with Putin.
Okay, just to confirm what you're saying there, I mean, some of the research that I came in contact with was that, okay, first, skyscrapers, and this is why Donald Trump is going to release this. I mean, he, of all people, would know that according to this Russian nuclear physicist, he said that all skyscrapers have to have a demolition plan before they build it. So these mini nukes were placed in the foundation of the World Trade Center as their demolition plan. It was designed this way from the beginning. So they were called mini nukes. That's why I was asking for the clarification between clean nukes, mini nukes. I think we're talking about the same thing. He says that these were the nukes that were in the World Trade Center, and the reason he would know that is because when nukes are used, that there is a treaty between all countries who have nukes, who are using it for peaceful purposes. That there's a committee of people who are informed. So this was a Russian, and they took him and put him in prison in Thailand for 10 years because. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I've interviewed Dmitry Kolozov before. His theory is wrong. I mean, he talks about massive nukes of 150 kiloton size that would have leveled all of lower Manhattan. He's got the right idea.
Right.
Let me explain. There are 3 different theories about how this could have been done.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis Camino did a brilliant article entitled 9/11, a world swirling in a volcano of lies, where he talked about the use of mini or micro nukes to destroy the buildings from the top down to create an envelope of debris, an umbrella within which they could then set off a larger nuke to take out the core columns. That's one theory. A second theory that I have been advocating was a sophisticated arrangement of mini or micro nukes, where you could blow, for example, a cube of 10 floors per second, and that would correspond because the top 3 cubes, the top 30 floors of the South Tower tilted to the side were taken out of 1. That's why you have 9 seconds for the South and 11 for the North. The third theory, and that's what Joe Olson is advocating here, is that it was 2 stages. You destroyed the inner, core,
right,
and then destroyed the outer as an effect of having destroyed the inner. So it's roughly the opposite of the Camino design. But I'm telling you, we have so much evidence that this was a nuclear event. It's simply overwhelming. The question now is a matter of refining the model that corresponds most closely to exactly how it was done.
Okay, 2 points to clarify. So you're saying that they took out the initial structure because the main structure was the center tube of the tower, and then they did controlled demolition after that.
No.
No.
What I'm saying is
that
the way it was done, the controlled demolition was with Building 7. Okay, that's a classic controlled building. You got all the floors coming down together. They're not blowing apart from the top down. They're not being converted into millions of cubic yards of very fine dust. And you got a pile of debris equal to the classic formula, 12% of the original height of 47 floors. In the Twin Towers, observably, they're blowing apart from the top down. They're being converted into millions of cubic yards of dust. And when it's over, there is no pile of debris in their footprints, which ought to have equaled 13.5 floors, approximately is 12% of 110. That means it was done in a novel method, which turns out to have been nuclear. We have, for example, the U.S. Geological Survey's dust sample studies that shows a host of elements that would not have been present had this not been a nuclear event: barium, strontium, lithium, lanthanum, tritium, some of which only exist in radioactive forms.
Right.
Question becomes, how was it done?
Right.
The early theory of Dmitry Kalizov posited a bomb that was much too large for the occasion because it would have leveled all of lower Manhattan at 150 kilotons.
Sure.
Now, these things are all measured in terms of dynamite as the standard. We're talking about, for example, on the Joe Olson theory, an equivalent of 400 tons of TNT equivalent. So these are much smaller bombs. But the idea there is there's one in the sub-basement of each of the towers, directed upwards. They go right up the 47 core columns in the inner container. Where you have this, within, it's like a can within a can, right? I mean, and you take that out, and then because it's taken out all the support columns that are connected to the external, it starts to pull in and further destroy the rest of the building.
Right.
But why I'm holding out for the continued use of mini NICs is at least two grounds. One is that tilt of the 30 floors of the South Tower, which just disappears pop. That's explainable with the use of a sophisticated arrangement of mini or micro nukes, but not, so far as I can see as yet, with this, blowout of the core columns to take it out as well. And second of all, just that there's no massive pile of debris in the center whatsoever, and yet it would seem if once you take out the core column, you're then bringing down the rest of the structure. The tube within the tube. Once you've destroyed the inner tube and you're bringing down the outer tube, you would think, be a massive pile of debris there. So I'm still holding out. Okay. What I'm saying is we've got different theories of how it was done, and now we're fine-tuning exactly how it was done, but the big picture has emerged.
All right, I think we're going to do a separate report on this because we need to do updates.
Sure.
We did one last year on September 11th. We'll do one again this year, but we'll see what happens. There's a lot of theories out there, folks, and it's not just one. It wasn't just one way. There were several things involved.
And what I do as a professional philosopher of science, Louise, is evaluate theories on the basis of the appropriate criteria, clarity and precision of language, scope of application for explanation and prediction, support by the empirical evidence, and then economy or elegance or simplicity with which you attain that result. So, I mean, this is my background as a professional philosopher, which fits perfectly because that's what I do professionally, is articulate the theory and principles for comparing theories with one another. So you got a great idea. We'll do one on 9/11.
Yeah, the nerve of you to use reason and logic.
That's right.
Okay, folks, so that's it for our report today. Jim, thank you very much. I'll look forward to doing that update on 9/11 because more has happened, more has come to pass, will come to light. We have more progress on that, and we will do a special report on that. Always. We've always done that on September 11th since GoldFish Report started. So, Jim, thank you very much. This was a very interesting and very busy report. We had so much to talk about, and there's even more that's going to happen today to talk about. So, who knows?
Yes.
Maybe we'll end up doing that Wednesday update again. I don't know.
I imagine when we'll get off, we'll find out if my prediction is or is not correct about his choice for the Supreme Court.
Okay, we'll see. This will happen. We'll find out. So everybody, that's a big announcement, and it's not happened yet. I think it's going to happen after lunch, actually. So it's probably after lunchtime now. So it's probably going to be any minute, if not already.
Right.
So
That's
let's
right.
go. So we're going to jump off real quick so we can go find out. So see you, everybody.
Louisa.
Bye, Jim. See you next
Real
week.
pleasure.
You too, as always. And everyone, thanks for viewing. Let's go. We're going to break right now so we can go find out who that Supreme Court pick is. And we will see you next week for another POTUS report, and also Friday for another Country Roads. And having said that, thank you for viewing. And this concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.